Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Link Live. My name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and I'm here with my lovely ladies. Do you want to go around?
Hi, I'm Brielle Jekyll. I'm the Associate Editor.
And I am McKenna Morales, and I am the Assistant Editor.
And today we have such a special Link Live. Today, we are revealing our 2021 overall Pros to Know winner for Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and we are so excited. First off, before we dive in, we do have some other exciting things. Brielle, you have a little bit of news. We don't want to totally impede on our Pros to Know winner, but we do have to share the spotlight. So, Brielle, would you like to share us your news?
I'm engaged!
2 supply chain weddings. Well, 3 if you include Brian Hines, our sales rep, but we are very, very excited. So congratulations, Brielle.
Thank you.
So excited. So just a reminder to our audience, nominations for Food Logistics Top Green Providers Award close March 21st. So please get those nominations in. I'm going to put the link in the chat just to make it easy. Also, nominations for Supply and Demand Chain Executives Top Supply Chain Projects, that's open through April 11th. I'll put that link in the chat as well. And make sure you register for our next SCN Summit on Transportation, which takes place March 30th and April 1st. I'll put the link in that chat for you as well. So who's ready for the big reveal? Are we so excited? So please, everybody, welcome our 2021 overall Pros to Know winner, award winner for Supply and Demand Chain Executive. I'm going to turn their camera on. 3, 2, 1. Yay!
Hello. Excited to be here.
We are here with Richard Labovitz, CEO and founder of Lean DNA. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor and privilege to be here. It's like I said, we're excited for me personally to get the recognition and the award, but for our team as well. It's also great company. I know some of the leaders that are involved with the organization and other Pros to Know are really innovating across the supply chain. So, excited to be here and humbled and excited to receive the award.
We are excited to have you be a part of our program today. We're excited for you to receive it. I know you and your company, especially you, have done so many wonderful things. So we might as well kind of get started on talking about those wonderful things. The chat, thank you, everybody. Oh, we have Sherry Hinnish on board. Thank you, Sherry, for watching. She says, congrats, we're very excited. So, as you know, this Pros to Know award has been around for quite some time, but it was especially meaningful for us this year because of the nature of everything that's been going on. So what does this honor mean to you and your company and the future of the supply chain in general?
So I guess a couple of things. When I look at the supply chain, there's been a lot of innovation that's happened over the last many, many years around technology. It's a very complex area. Even if you look at the news today, 10 years ago, how often did you hear the word supply chain? Now you're hearing about supply chain, the impacts of it on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of innovation has taken place, but some of the challenges that we've seen is that in the factory, it's still been left behind. And so my last 30 years around lean manufacturing supply chain has really been focused on the factory and how do we make that much more of a strategic force for the business? And how does it view it in the overall context of the supply chain? So getting this type of recognition, not only is it exciting, but it starts to put some stamp of recognition around the importance of what we're doing and the importance of the factory, that this is now not just a black box in the overall supply chain, but it's becoming a much more complex network where the factory is critical. And so even though we've been working on this really for my entire career, really focused on the factory and how does it impact the business and the overall supply chain, getting this type of recognition just starts to create some momentum around what we're doing. It creates the recognition that there's a need there. And I think that's the biggest thing that needs to start to change to occur is that recognition, both for what we do, but also the type of problem that we're addressing. Because I would say our biggest challenge that we run into is not that people don't realize that there's a problem that's out there, but it's getting them to shift away from the status quo, that they can really leverage technology to become better. So this type of recognition really is going to do a lot for us, I think, for the industry to recognize there's a real opportunity out there around the factory and how it impacts the supply chain. And now let's start making a difference. So excited, and that's some of the things that we're seeing would be the changes that we see or opportunities around the supply chain.
Brielle? Oh,
And so when I
keep
was
going.
when I was writing the article, which is live now on SUCE.com or SUCEexec.com, the profile on you, I noticed that you were instrumental in working with several manufacturers' procurement teams to prevent supply shortage and more. So in a time of crisis, how and why do you do this?
Well, so the interesting thing that we saw, especially over the pandemic crisis, was that you had some companies where the demand was dropping, right? Demand dropped off and they were struggling with how do we get rid of excess inventory. And that was one challenge that we were involved with many companies that were using our technology. But at the same time we had, which was good, we had a lot of other companies that were struggling with increasing demand. So we work not only in consumer products and aerospace and industrial products, but we also work in the medical device industry. And so that was the case where their demand was actually increasing. So in that world, not only was the demand going up, but some of the challenges that they were having was that the supply chain had grown to be very global, very complicated. And so when you start looking at the area of shortages, it's not anything new, but the challenge is that it's gotten worse over time. The products that companies are making are much more customized, so there's a lot more variety. So when you combine the increasing level of product customization with the fact that you now have suppliers that are providing those goods located all over the world, shortages become a real challenge, which would be very different, let's say 10 to 15 years ago, where the products that you're making were much, much simpler. So as you've seen that increase in product customization and the globalization of supplier, as shortages become more critical, the ability to prioritize those becomes one of the biggest challenges facing factories. And so what we've been doing is using technology to help go forward in time and help predict future shortages. So not just firefight, what are my problems today, but start to give visibility into those future shortages and then take a step forward to prioritize, well, what are those that are going to affect order shipping this week versus orders that may be shipping in several weeks versus future demand that may not be something we need to focus on today. And that's where we see technology has become a real critical component of making it easy to take data out of your existing systems, assure that that data is trusted, and then help prioritize that information so people know what to focus on today. You combine it with the fact that during the pandemic, one of the things that we saw was that factories were very quick to come back online, which was a good thing. But a lot of the people managing factories, the back office staff, the buyers, the planners, the analysts, they're actually working from home, even the executives. So how do you prioritize these shortages or prioritize issues, but do it in a way where people are no longer able to come into a traditional war room with spreadsheets, whiteboards, where they're tracking their shortages, which existed, I would say, primarily, prior to the pandemic. That's the way people managed the business. But today that was no longer doable. So now we're having to deal with things like critical shortages and prioritize those, but do it in a virtual environment. And that's where the technology has made a real difference. And a lot of our customers, what we saw too, is that when you look at what was a priority one shortage, let's say at a factory, when you looked at what the supplier saw, it wasn't always consistent. So this ability to not only optimize and prioritize within the factory is one aspect of what we do, but then being able to leverage technology to collaborate with your suppliers so that they understand those priorities. That's another opportunity, another issue that we were seeing over many, many years that we've been focused on trying to solve through our technology.
Besides crisis management, how has the procurement side of the supply chain transformed since the pandemic hit?
Yeah, so I would say much of my career around the supply chain, the factories around technology, and some of the challenges that we've seen in the supply chain was not that they didn't want to improve, but there was a lot of resistance to change. And a lot of times the technology that they deployed was solving a lot of problems, like let's say around demand planning, or it created better visibility around logistics or around the last mile around transportation. But when you actually looked at the factory, there wasn't that level of transformation yet. And so some of the challenges that we run into is that the technology wasn't really built for the factory aspect of supply chain. And because of that, the tools that were being used didn't really work effectively. So people reverted back to spreadsheets. So even though there was a strong ROI to make a change, there just wasn't that momentum. So prior to pandemic, it was always about, let's just stick with the status quo, or we have good spreadsheets that work, or we built a homegrown solution. So people tended to stay with those type of solutions. Today, though, we've shifted from the cloud being a nice to have, we're now shifting to the cloud as a mandate. So it's gone from people being content with these disconnected spreadsheets to where now everybody's trying to get online. And we have a lot of companies where we were pushing this and driving it for years, or companies that I knew for years that just were never interested in making that transformation, where now they've got mandates from the top down. So that's one of the big changes that we've seen. And so because of that, companies have now been, in a way, forced to do it. And so now the transformation has begun. And the great thing about it is now that it's begun, people are starting to get excited about it. Where people were very content with a lot of the spreadsheet tools because they felt like they could touch the data, they had control over it. Now they're getting more comfortable with moving to more of a digital online world. And so when you start thinking about what that does for the factories, that creates a lot of the ability to deploy technology faster. You can engage people more easily. You can engage your suppliers as well, which has always been a big challenge. And for us as a company, the ability to support people remotely, like we work in about 17 different countries. So we have factories all over the world. And what part of why we were always pushing the cloud and the SaaS model early on is the ability to work more collaboratively with our customers as well, because people want to change, but sometimes there's either issues with the data or questions that they have. And so the ability to actually create that collaboration for us to be able to support our customers more virtually has been very important as well. So I think we've made that shift. People are starting to transform, and now the journey's begun. And now that it's begun, I think what could have taken 10 to 15 years, I think you're going to see some amazing transformations over the next 1 to 2 years.
I have seen that in every aspect of in the cloud and technology in every sector, not just procurement. That is so true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think people are excited about it to some degree, like around AI. And I think there's certain things that we're seeing are really important. And I wouldn't say it's totally unique about operations, but it's very important for people that are running factories to really trust the information and understand why. And so some of where these technologies help is that understanding of why, where you're asking me to cancel a purchase order, but I know that if I make a bad decision, it could affect the delivery, that could have a major impact on the business. So this ability to understand why and leverage AI is very effective, but there needs to be a journey that companies can go through to actually get to where AI becomes very impactful. So a lot of excitement there, a lot of great technology, but it's something where I do think you need to have a good way of deploying, and that's where the SaaS, the cloud model becomes very effective, where it doesn't need to be all at once. You can do things a lot more progressive, and then I think that works well for the supply chain and manufacturing that we're primarily focused on.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. So I know we kind of talked about this a little bit offline before we went live. And, I explained how, for food logistics, our April issue, we're covering food safety. And everybody said, we're not out of the woods yet. There's still more stuff coming. From where you sit, having to deal with everything that you dealt with this past year, what advice do you have for some of these companies who may not necessarily still be at that level where they're implementing the technology necessary to kind of override these supply chain disruptions?
Yeah, it's a great question, because for me, having been in this for like 30 years, as I mentioned earlier, this issue that we're seeing now with disruption is really not new. I mean, it's obviously an order of magnitude worse, obviously, the last year, but it's something that always occurs, whether it's a hurricane, an earthquake, you could have a labor strike at your plant. So it's always going to happen. I think that's what people in the supply chain have learned over time, and it could be worse during some periods, but get better or less worse or better in other times of the year or throughout the duration of your company. The focus needs to be around prioritization, and that's what we teach people, is that whenever a disruption occurs, the biggest area you need to focus on is identifying what are the things that are going to impact us first, and what are those 5 to 10 things for me as a buyer, for example, I need to focus on today that's going to have the biggest impact on the business. What is that critical shortages, which could be one part out of 500 that are going to affect an order? If I have excess inventory, what drove that and how do I prevent that going forward? So the biggest opportunity that any company can take in supply chain, even now, even if you don't have the more sophisticated technology, it's about prioritization, understanding, what are those things I can do each day? But then more importantly, combine that with standard work and some best practices around workflow so that you can not only prioritize what to do, understand why, but then hold people accountable. And if there's issues where you can't address it, how do you escalate that to different parts of the organization to get that resolved? And so developing that type of process, and we call that sometimes like an inventory attack team or a shortage attack team. Any company can really do that. Obviously, technology makes it more valuable, but creating that attack team that's built around prioritization, execution, holding people accountable, even in normal times where disruptions will occur, at least you feel comfortable that you're making the right decision, kind of day to day. And it's not only as a company, but even as a buyer or as an individual day to day. If everybody can be making the right decision on the top priorities as a business, you start to really dramatically change the way you're able to perform and execute.
We see a lot of folks that we talk to and when we survey and stuff, and a lot of the challenge that some of these companies have is getting to that point of understanding the technology enough to be able to figure out what they need to use to implement or deploy. And so I think the technology itself is half the challenge for some of these companies that have never really dealt with blockchain or Internet of Things. They don't understand it. I mean, we write about it all the time, and I still don't fully understand it. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of these companies. They're kind of scared of what it is,
Right. And when I think about what got me in this area and passionate about it was exactly that. I was in factories and I felt like the technology wasn't technology out there built for me, and it wasn't really solving my problem. And one of the challenges I think in supply chain is when you look at the more traditional top-down approach that supply chain technologies, the way they used to deploy, is pretty much you deploy everything all at once. So if you have 50 sites and you're changing the way you do demand planning or forecasting, it tends to be all at once over many months or even years with huge amount of change management involved with the business. And that can be very expensive, disruptive with a high degree of risk. So the way we approach technology, it's much more about taking small steps. And so when we go into a company, we actually like to start with one site. And you may have 40 or 50, but we like to start with one. We like to get the team of 10 to 20 buyers and planners now using it. You start to get some excitement with that team. They talk about how easy it's to use. They talk about the results that they see. And then once you do that, then you start to have the ability to really transform and get them to start adopting new technology. And then from there, you go into the second site or third site. Because I think you're exactly right, is that people are scared of technology. They feel like they've already invested in an ERP system, and we get questions like, well, doesn't it already do that? Or we just deployed a BI solution. Well, doesn't it solve the problem? So you have different people in the company thinking that the technology that they procured in the past solves the problem, but the reality is it hasn't. And that's why we exist, is because there's still a gap there. So the approach is to start small, get that adoption, and then prove the results, improve the ROI. And then for us, we've had incredible success expanding from there, but it's not normal. Most technology, it's typically a big enterprise all at once. And I think that's some of the challenges in the past. But it does put a lot of pressure on companies like LeanDNA, because if it doesn't work, you spend a lot of time deploying the technology, you don't have that success. So it put a lot of pressure on us over many years to prove out that way of deploying, to make sure you deal with data issues and adoption issues and workflow issues. But for us, it's the best way to drive transformation. Drive small, create trusted data, and then kind of deploy from there going forward.
And
expand.
So we did get a viewer question. Are you using any supply chain risk technology to proactively identify risks in your network through the lens of supply, manufacturing, or delivery, like Resolink or Aveda, for example?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we do, and again, we tend to view the world that there's a lot of good technology that's out there, like risk analysis around the supply chain or demand planning, and we don't want to compete with that. We've really focused on what's the gap and how do we build technology to deal with that. So where we deal with the risk is more on kind of identifying it, understanding supplier performance from the delivery perspective. So we do work to understand, like, what are the drivers around the supplier performance side that helps us deal with issues around delivery. Then within the four walls of the factory, it's about the prioritization, understanding the impact of that risk, and then starting to use it more tactically to set the right order policies around replenishment methods, what should be on pull, what should be on MRP. If it's on MRP, what's the right order policy? So the way we view risk is to use that information. We do analytics around it, but our primary focus is around how do we get the site to execute and deal with the risk, and how do we get the policy set right to optimize based on whatever that risk is, because it'll always occur and you can try to minimize it. But on a day-to-day basis, what the factories are really dealing with is we did a great job predicting what we thought could happen, but here's what really happened today. How do we deal with it? And how do we make sure that based on what we see happening, how do we use that to get better over time? That's really the way we tend to use the area of like risk and analysis, especially around the supplier piece, supplier component.
Oh,
So what if,
sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Marina. I was like, is this my turn?
it is your turn.
Oh,
I
okay.
thought you were mute.
Sorry, I just had that But what advice do you have for others in the industry trying to navigate all of today's disruptions? And if so, like, what do you wish you knew when you were younger?
Yeah, so I think, you know, for me, when I look at kind of what I learned is obviously the importance of the factory side, and kind of the critical link where the factory fits. So I think some of it I mentioned around like starting kind of step by step and be progressive about how you approach it. I would say that the technology is becoming more critical. When I look back 15, 20 years ago, and I was with a Japanese firm for early part of my career where my partners came from Honda and Toyota and really pioneered a lot of these earlier methods around lean manufacturing and supply chain. They really encouraged you to be very manual and touch the data, and they were always big about putting white paper on big boards out in the factory floor. That's the way the world worked in the past. I think it's changed now. I think you have a new generation of leaders that are coming out where they only know the world of technology and they're used to it. And so how do we bring those two environments together? So the thing I would tell people is the world's changing, and it's shifting from, solving these known problems very manually to where we really need to be smart about technology. And I don't think it was always viewed that way in factories. I think there was a whole culture that started even when I got involved, which was about keeping things very visual and very visual and manual. And there's a certain benefit of that, mainly around the understanding of your data. But as we shift, I think we need the new emerging leaders to really understand how to leverage technology. But the important thing is to use technology, but still keep the idea that it needs to be simple. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to kind of, it's like you want to be able to come into a factory and let it just talk to you. You want it to tell you its problems. You don't want to have to chase after things. And so the important thing about technology is not doing it where it becomes a black box. And I think that's some of the mistakes people are making, is they're excited about technology and they want to create this black box AI that's just going to tell some buyer or planner or an analyst at a factory what to do. I don't think that's going to work. I think you're already seeing some of that. You need to have a way for people to leverage AI, leverage that technology, but do it in a way where people can still understand it and makes their jobs easier. One of the best comments I ever heard from one of our customers was, what she really loved about Lean DNA is it just gave her weekends back. And that's kind of what I think is exciting about technology, is don't just do it for the benefit of just doing it, or get excited about AI. And I know you mentioned blockchain. There's some great things there, but you have to do it in the context of making the daily life easier for people running these factories. And if you can do that, then a lot of the things we talked about around adoption or results, let's put it everywhere, starts to happen. But I think sometimes the mistake is being too focused on the technology, not on the people side of it, and how do we get all of that to work together?
I think that's really important, especially in a time like now, because before we all went live, you asked us if we were all working from home. And at this point, we are just living at work. So having the technology to separate and be able to do for you, I think is really like important and essential.
The best technology for sure is technology that solves a problem and makes your life easier.
Absolutely.
In any industry.
And I was just going to add, that's why the supply chain, it really is complicated. When you think about the different vendors and modules and all the tools, I mean, most of our customers will have sometimes 10 to 15 different ERP systems. And so really understanding not how you replace everything, but how do we work in that environment to make it better? I think that's really the future. And it's really complementary bolt-on solutions. It's empowering the investments that you've made and make those better. I think that's really the opportunity that we're excited about. And we're starting to see some of that. And the technology is becoming more cost effective. And we talk about the SaaS and the cloud. I really don't think we could be doing a lot of the things today that we're doing, 5 or 10 years ago. So the technology's there, the strategy's there, the domain expertise exists. It's like, how do you pull these pieces together and really make the change happen? And as bad as it was the past year, there's no doubt that it created this transformational initiative. And if we can view any positive out of it, it's like, how do we take that now and make something really great out of it when it comes to supply chain in the factory? And we're seeing it. We're seeing it start to happen now, where some great things are starting to happen. And it's kind of, in a way, a little bit exciting to think through what's going to happen a year or two from now, like what supply chain is going to look like.
So going back to risks, we actually have another viewer question. And it's something that I always think about too. What about the risks tied to sustainability, like ethical labor and fair trade and, safety, human health, labor, those kind of things?
Yeah. So just as coming from the manufacturing side, that's really critical, in terms of, safety and the environment. So I think there's that aspect of it where I think it's something you just it has to be on something you talk to every day as part of your daily stand-up meetings. When we look at the way factories are run, safety and health and the environment's a part of it. So I think there's that aspect of it within factories that I think is really critical. But I also think when you talk about supply chain, there's things around like excess inventory or waste that are associated with it. And some of the biggest waste, it'd be having too much of what we don't need and not enough of what we need. And that ends up wasting, labor, but it also does affect material and the environment and other aspects of sustainability. So as a lean manufacturing individual who grew up in that environment and obviously working on the lean aspects of supply chain, it's all about, kind of efficiency and eliminating waste, and that drives things around sustainability. And so a lot of what we do when we think about, excess inventory, the good thing is it helps with working capital. It helps with delivery. It helps with efficiency, but it also helps with those other aspects when you're talking about sustainability and the environment, because you're not creating all this wasted material that you need to end up, trying to determine what you're going to do with. So I think it solves a lot of issues if you can do it right in terms of getting the supply chain balanced.
Well, Richard, I appreciate you being a part of our program today. And again, congratulations on being named Supply and Managing Executives 2021 Pros to Know Award winner. This is so exciting. It's been such a year and you truly deserved it and your company truly deserves it. So thank you for everything that you and your company have done to keep everybody moving and moving strong. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure being here and very excited about the award. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Just a reminder to everybody, the profile on Richard that McKenna wrote is live on our site, scexec.com. So go to check it out. We will reveal the remainder of the Pros to Know winners next week. So keep an eye out for that. As always, thank you to all of our essential workers, all of the frontline workers, everyone who's out there day to day, in and out of it, continues to keep our nation's supply chains moving. We thank you. Make sure you go to foodlogistics.com, scexec.com. You can download our link podcast channel. You can read our blog posts, check out videos, read expert columns, and more. In the meantime, please join us next week, same time, same place, 11 a.m. Central on Wednesday, for our St. Patrick's Day special, where we'll be talking about the beer and spirits supply chain and green beer. Why not? So we hope to see you next week. And thank you again, Richard. And thank you again, ladies. And we'll see you next week, 11 a.m. Central. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.